So let's have a look on static subclasses. As Laure told you, the main idea of static subclasses is to have within a given group, within a given type, there are some values that will lead the system to have different behaviors. And so with these different behaviors, the idea is that you would like to preserve this reachability graph, but not for the whole class, just for some subclass. So this is mainly the interest of these static subclasses. So in fact, formally, you have a color domain, the one of a place, for example, and this color domain will be split, as Laure mentioned, into subclasses. In the example from Laure, you had on one side slow processor, on the other side fast processors, but this is just subdivisions, and the union of these subdivisions make the whole class, and of course no value is shared by any subdivision. Okay? So basically symmetries are defined by this set, these subdomains, and in fact, within these subdomains, you have the possibility, you have a group, a permutation group, that will associate to any, that will ensure that if you have a symbolic state within this subclass, any component of this subclass has the same behavior. So this is the basic idea. Here, let's have a small example. On this example, okay, we are back to the process example, okay, the process that use a resource to get, for example, in a critical section. The critical section is there. But here, we decide that the set of process defined by, the ID is defined by the class C, is in fact divided into D1 and D2. And it means that here we can fire transition T1 only when the identity is the identity of the D1 subclass. So it means that for transition T1, when it fires, it takes any value within class C and outputs any value within class C, but it's not exactly true, because if the value in class C belongs to D2, you will never fire the transition because of this guard. Okay, I put it in blue now, where you specify that your value must belong to the D1 subclasses. Okay. It's typically interesting. Let's imagine that you have a program where within the program you have test functions, and then you will have threshold values. Below the value, it's that behavior because you go in the then part, otherwise you go in the else part, etc., etc. Okay? So you can imagine that you can extract from your specification these static subclasses. These static subclasses are supposed to be valid all over the execution of the model, so of the program. And of course, if there is another action that splits, for example here D1, you will not have two subclasses but three subclasses, and in the worst case possible, you will have one subclass per element in your color class. Okay? If you're unlucky, I mean. So this is applied to the firing. Okay, here I must confess that there are two parts for my firing. So the part where C1 is concerned, C1 and C2. So in fact, this is the part that corresponds to D1, and here this is, with another color, the part corresponding to D2. And the part corresponding to D2, as I told you, would of course never fire. Here, I mixed the colors, okay, but the idea is behind that. Okay, so it means that there will be in your symbolic reachability graph, there will be two symbolic states, okay, one for the colors that are in D1 and one for the colors that are in D2, and from the symbolic state with the colors in D2, the values in D2, you will never fire transition T1 because it's not allowed due to the ground. So now let's get interesting in the subclass D1. Okay, then you fire just for D1 due to this ground. Now it's in the appropriate color. Okay, and then you can construct, you can build, you can fire the transition and build the next symbolic states on these subclasses. And once again, your static subclasses on your system are the sum of all the constraints that apply and that will make a subdivision in terms of behavior due to some threshold value somewhere in your specification. This is really the real idea behind that. And then it's of interest because you are not forced to declare two different types. It's ridiculous for a processor. It's ridiculous to separate. It's important to separate fast and slow cores or processors, but it's stupid to have two discrete types that just represent the same thing. So, as a conclusion, static subclasses are needed and useful to model complex algorithm in a nice way. They are also a way that can be deduced automatically from your specification. Initially, they were meant to be provided by the user. But if the user makes a mistake, it can be a problem. If you are in doubt, then reduce your subclasses, static subclasses to singleton. Then you're sure that it's not maybe as efficient as having smart subclasses, but it's correct, it remains correct. Otherwise, you have to be sure that the thresholds really make the subclasses appropriate. It preserves the efficiency of constructing the reachability graph, the symbolic reachability graph, sorry, and it preserves also the reduction factor. It's not exactly the same because the permutation group do not apply to the entire color type, but it applies to subclasses. But you don't have this split into what we call explicit execution of the net, where you have an explicit reachability graph where all the values are enumerated. You still keep the advantage of having these dynamic subclasses where you take care about the number of elements that is coming from that type. But there are some cases where a system is of course not completely symmetric. Let's take distributed algorithms. Usually distributed algorithms, in particular peer-to-peer algorithms, are very nice from that point of view because you have an algorithm that is the same for every processor, but it changes according to the context of the process. Okay? For example, if you have a token ring or if you have a DHT, digital distributed hash table, sorry, then you have a common algorithm, but you must consider that you may have some phases in execution of your algorithm where there are some differences. For example, initializing your system or terminating your system, you might be in a situation where you have no symmetry at all, or at least the symmetry you are expecting in the global execution of the system is not true. Also, let's imagine that you request a property. For example, you request a query to be always executed. So in CTL, you can express that very easily by stating, okay, always, when query X gets, in all the future, query X gets out. The problem is that X is not a value. Okay, X is any value within the type of queries you have. So the query will be a color type. And in that situation, you cannot use static subclasses because each time you will change the value of the query, you will change the static subclasses. So you are typically in a situation where the static subclasses are useless. Okay, but you know that when you're considering one X, in fact, you have one X on one hand, but you have all other values but X in another hand. Okay, and you can see that this symmetry stuff still applies.